If you've ever thought about building a new construction rental property from the ground up, then you're going to want to watch this video first. We recently completed building 2 duplexes down in Florida, and I'm very happy with the result. We have a brand new asset that's going to produce lots of income for years to come. But I was talking to a friend of mine about some of the lessons I learned throughout this process that I wish I had known in advance. And I think it'd be really helpful to share some of these lessons so you can avoid some of the same mistakes I made. So just to provide a little bit of background, I bought my first rental property back in 2006 while I was serving in the Army. Then I got out of the Army in 2011, and that's when I dove into real estate full time. And I did just about every strategy there is in real estate investing. I flipped a lot of properties, bought long-term rentals, and in 2017, I discovered this specific niche of lower cost, high cash flowing short-term rentals. And that's when I went all in on this strategy. And it was a huge blessing to my family. That's what got us to financial freedom over the next few years. And over the last 3 years, I've worked with hundreds of people now to help them implement this strategy and create really high cash flow for them and their families as well. We initially built our entire portfolio here in Northwest Indiana, where we live, with the long-term goal of eventually buying in a warmer climate as well. And so that was the impetus behind these 2 new builds, these 2 duplex new builds that are being used as short-term rentals, because we want to use them in the winter months when it's miserable here in Indiana as well. And so we thought if we can buy a property that kicks off great cash flow, it's a brand new asset, we've got economies of scale with multiple units, and it's got the amenities of a shared pool in the backyard, that's the best of all worlds. So after almost 2 decades of investing and doing hundreds of deals, these are my very first 2 new builds. And looking back at the process, there's really 3 big lessons learned that if I had understood these or done these better, it could have made the deal much better. And there are 3 things that I'd encourage you to think about as well if you're considering pursuing this strategy. Lesson number 1 is understanding how incredibly impactful the timeline is on a project like this. So each day that a project lasts, there is a dollar figure attached to that day that's costing you. So for example, if you're borrowing $400,000 in a construction loan at 12% interest only, which is a common type of loan, that means that you're going to owe $48,000 every single year in interest. So if you divide that by 365 days in the year, that's $131.50 each day just in interest. Then on top of that, you've got your other carrying costs, like cost of insurance, that's a daily cost, cost of taxes, cost of utilities. So you pile all that on, and it's the same as about, say, $200 a day. So each day that a contractor doesn't show up, it's the exact same as lighting $200 on fire. So they don't show up for a week, that's $1,000 that you just lit on fire. And a common phrase that you'll hear in it, it's not just in new construction, but across, contractors that do, rehabs on flips or other types of properties as well, is don't worry, we're behind here, but we're gonna catch up later. And it's just not gonna happen. If a contractor could catch up and go at a higher speed, then why wouldn't they just do that right out of the gate? It's not like they have this extra gear that they can just kick in to catch up. So, this might not sound like a lot, but if the plan is to have a project, say, completed in 9 months, and the builder's not all over planning out every single moving piece and ensuring that there's no bottlenecks, then there can be delays at every stage throughout. And so a 9-month project can turn into twice as long, and it can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars extra that you weren't planning on just in interest and extension fees and all your other carrying costs. So on a project like this, the cost of construction itself can remain the same, but the overall cost of completing the project can be night and day different just based on all these extra fees and interest and carrying costs due to an increased timeline alone. So this was the case with us. The initial projection was 9 months for the entire project, start to finish, but because of delays with the city department and with the architect and with the engineer and all the other things that go into getting approval to start, we didn't even get permit to go ahead and start the build for 9 months. Luckily, we were in a place where we hadn't borrowed a huge amount against the construction loan, and our construction loan just charged interest on the amount that we had borrowed. So some charge interest on the entire loan amount right up front, but luckily we hadn't borrowed a whole lot and we were just paying interest on the amount borrowed. So in addition to all the added carrying costs throughout the entire 9 months, at that point inflation had caused the cost of construction to increase over $30,000 before we even started breaking ground, which this kind of ties into my next lesson. Lesson number 2 is around builder selection and the way you structure your agreement with the builder up front. So when you're building a property like this, there are what feels like about 1 million different variables from the time you purchase the lot to the time you refinance at the very end into long-term financing after everything's built. You know, throughout the permit approval process to the construction process and all the different subs that are a part of the project to the final inspections with the city, there's so many different dependencies that are very difficult to predict. And you're going to have to 100% rely on that builder to handle all of it. You're not going to be involved in any of those decisions. And the result of those decisions is going to impact directly your bottom line. So luckily for us, I had a friend down there who's a builder, who's a great guy and very trustworthy. So I wasn't concerned about a builder stealing a bunch of my money and screwing me over, which can be a concern with certain builders. But I've thought about this a lot. There's sort of a spectrum of agreements that you can come up with a builder. And on one end of the spectrum, you've got very open-ended agreements. And then on the other, you've got, every single I dotted and T crossed, and you've got multiple attorneys involved and every possible term spelled out. And as I've thought through the best strategy and what I would recommend, just to share our example, so we went into it with a very open-ended contract because of the trust that was in place. And basically the agreement was we were going to pay cost and then pay the builder fee on top of that. So whatever the cost of the materials and build was, that came back to us. Now the other end of that spectrum would be that you are super dialed in on this is the exact amount, there's no change orders, this is a timeline, and if there's ever any change to that, the builder gets penalized heavily. And so that's another way to approach it. The problem with this super strict agreement with the penalties in place and everything falling back on the builder is that every project starts off great. But when you get halfway through and all of a sudden the builder realizes that they're behind on timeline, they underestimated the cost of the project, and all of this is going to come out of their pocket and they're being penalized every single day, at some point they lose all motivation to continue. And so you're left with a half-built property because they would lose money by finishing the property. So why would they ever show up again to complete the work? On the other end of the spectrum, with the more open-ended agreement, all of the additional costs fall back on you, yet you have no decision-making ability on the day-to-day. The builder controls all of that. So if the timeline goes longer, or if there's a issue with a contractor, that's more money. So I've thought a lot about this, and the success of your project when it comes to builder selection boils down to really 2 things. You are never going to make a crook honest with really tight paperwork, and you're also not going to keep the motivation super high with an open-ended agreement. So you really have to do 2 things. You have to pick a builder who has a proven track record, and they've done this many, many times before, because if they've done it well before and they've stuck to a timeline and a budget before, they're probably going to be able to do it for you. And then also pick somebody who's super honest, because again, you can't make a crook honest with a contract. So if I had to go into this project again, I would ensure that the builder has built in that municipality before, and that we're signing an agreement up front that shares some of the potential burden of any cost overages or time overages that might come up. And the final lesson learned is that you really need to have way more cash available than you think you're going to need. So if you're going into a new construction project and you think that, yeah, this will be like a base hit type deal, it's going to be a good deal, not a grand slam type deal, then I would advise to really reconsider that project and look at the worst case scenario. If it doesn't go as planned, then what does it look like? Because we went into this project thinking this is actually going to be a grand slam. I mean, the initial projected numbers with the initial timeline and everything, it was going to be a really, really fantastic deal. So luckily that was the case, because now we learned some lessons and it cost us a bit more. The timeline was longer. And so we're still left with an asset that's a really great asset. And it's not a grand slam deal, but it's still a good deal. But had we gone into it with the thought process of this is a grand slam deal, I only have the cash available that I think I'm going to need and no extra for overages that might come up, which will come up because there's a million variables that can occur from the time you start the project to the end, then we would have been in a lot of pain. So in summary, we make really great income from buying existing properties that we can buy relatively turnkey or that need to be rehabbed, and we can turn those properties into lower cost, really high cash flowing short-term rentals. This is what got us to a place of financial independence, and this is what I recommend to other people when you're first starting out as well. A new build takes a lot longer, it requires a lot more capital, and there's a lot more variables that can come up throughout the process. However, once you've built a base of cash flow and you feel like you're in a good position from a cash flow standpoint, then building new build properties can be a great way to expand your portfolio, have some new stock that you're not going to have a whole bunch of maintenance on. You can design it the way you want it, and so you can use it personally as well, and you can have some flexibility. And in addition to cash flow, you can potentially get a lot more appreciation as well. So as always, I hope my personal pain can be your personal benefit. And if you want help getting your first high cash flowing short-term rental, I work with people every single day to help them with this process, to avoid a lot of the mistakes that I've made throughout my investing career and get to a property that cash flows several $1,000s a month as quickly as possible. So if you're interested in that program, you can go to livingoffrentals.com/call. You can set up a call with me directly. We can talk through your goals and see if the program is a good fit. Thanks for joining me for this video. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.